Thank you. I have a question here for Glenn on the north. One of our viewers is pointing out that challenges remain in the Northwest Territories and in Nunavut in finding alternatives to using diesel fuel for heating and for power. It's almost an impossible task for us to address this. The viewer is wondering, did the Auditors General make any recommendations back to Canada on how to help address this with infrastructure or in other ways?
There's no way around it. Trying to find alternative fuel sources in the north is a very difficult task. I know some of the territories are experimenting with solar power and other alternative forms of energy, even hydroelectricity.
There's a wind farm at the Diavik mine, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's the private sector that's actually doing some very innovative work. But having said that, you're dealing with a reality where it can be minus 40 degrees Celsius in the middle of winter, and it's not a place where you're going to experiment with alternative heating sources unless you're, very clear that they're going to work. That's a bit of a long-winded answer to saying, no, we didn't make any suggestions to governments in terms of what they could be doing to more forcefully explore alternative energy sources. But as departments across the Northwest Territories and Yukon and Nunavut are doing work to identify risks, I would hope that they would be at least thinking about alternatives that could exist in the area of energy.
Carol, does any of this ring true for northern British Columbia? I don't know if you looked at that or not.
So, certainly alternative energy sources is always a conversation in British Columbia. One of the northern issues in British Columbia was some gaps in the data. What we had found in our audit was the international standards for station density was missing in the northern regions and at high elevation. So, there are different issues. One of the British Columbia aspects, and we bring it out in our BC report, is the diversity of the province, and that in itself brings a number of, you've got flood issues along, you mentioned the floodplain maps. They are largely outdated in British Columbia, and you've got the diking issues around the Fraser River issue is different from a northern issue. So it's quite varied, and certainly doesn't we don't make any recommendations in terms of where the energy should come from, but most certainly it's a conversation here.
Thank you. I have a question for our federal commissioner. In 2015, Minister McKenna encouraged global leaders to adopt a target of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Yet she has since established a target that falls far short of this temperature goal, which it looks like we're very unlikely to meet. What within your findings might help us in civil society make the case for much more far-reaching actions, such as ending subsidies to the fossil fuels?
So, the federal target, right now, I think it's too soon to say whether or not we're going to reach that target. There are still 12 years between now and 2030. There is a new plan called the Pan-Canadian Framework. We really, we're looking to see the action plans and how that will be implemented. And I think we need to give the government some time to implement some of those actions, and we will be auditing this in the future. We have already done an audit on reducing inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, which is another commitment that the federal government made in the area of climate change. And due to a variety of access issues, it was actually the Auditor General of Canada who released this report. We will be doing a follow-up on that report, and I believe that'll come out in the next year or two. We audit against government commitments. It's not our job to tell the government what those commitments should be. That is really up to civil society. If civil society feels that the target is still too high, that's your job, in a sense, to advocate for changes to policy. As auditors and as commissioner, all I can do is audit against whatever the government has said it will do, and right now that's the existing 2030 target. We have audited in the past against the 2020 targets and previous targets, and rest assured our office will continue to audit against the 2030 target. I also hope that the Auditors Generals, probably future ones because they all have time-limited terms, but I do hope that in the future, say in 2023 or 2024, that another collaborative audit on climate change is done again to give a pan-Canadian look on where we're at, still within enough time to try to reach the 2030 target.
Thank you. We've lost our... Oh, he's back. Never mind. I have a question just in time for Mr. Pickup out in Nova Scotia. In your jurisdiction of Nova Scotia, what evidence was there that the province overmet their GHG reduction target due to economic reasons versus the reduction seen being due to the use of greenhouse gas reduction strategies being implemented?
That's a really, really good question because this is a complex area, and of course, attribution of a reduction like 18% that actually happened ahead of the planned 10%, attributing that down and disaggregating that to this was because of action A, this was because of action B, would be very challenging, I think, to do. And of course, we reported that that wasn't done. We did report in our audit that the government acknowledged that, in fact, that would be difficult to do, but that likely that 18% reduction was the result of a number of things. And part of that would have been their action, but part of that would have been other things as well, including actions that may have happened in the private sector, for example. If you have key certain industries that might have changed how they operate or if they operate in Nova Scotia at all, that may have impacted that as well. So there was no attempt to take that 18% and try and break that reduction down to 10, 15 key items, and there was acknowledgement by the government, and we refer to it in our report, that all of these factors would have played a role, but which one accounted for which was not ascertained as part of the audit or by the government.
Just a
But it's a great question.
Just a follow-up question, is that something that you could consider doing? For example, parsing out how much of meeting's target is due to reductions in population, deindustrialization, and how much is due to government actions to increase renewables and energy efficiency?
Well, I think it's something that the government itself may look to consider as it updates. Okay, what are the key actions they want to take, and what do they intend as part of those key actions to result? So we often talk about accountability for action, and accountability for action, of course, is always easier when there's some sort of measurable thing at the end of it to say we expect to do A, B, and C, and as a result of A, B, and C, we expect these things to happen, i.e., certain percentage reductions or things to go in a certain way. So, we'll leave it to see what happens as the government takes our recommendations from the audit and they look at updating the risk assessment and they look at updating a new plan and what that actually means. And we'll stay tuned. We'll be back. We did this audit in 2017. We'll be back to follow it up for reporting in 2020 to see what has actually happened with what we recommended.
What I wanted to say on this issue, though, is that this is something that we found across all the reports, all the audits, where that governments had not clearly identified for action A how many greenhouse gas, tons, megatons would be reduced. They had not actually done that calculation. So it's really government's work to do that work, right, and then we can audit against it. But the other thing that we've heard we need to be concerned about, or that governments need to be concerned about, is making sure that the different actions that they take are coherent amongst each other, so that you don't have one action and then another action that kind of contradicts it. So that's the analysis work that the government has to do, and then we can go in and audit against it.
Can or did the Auditor General look at the impact of carbon pricing on decoupling greenhouse gas emissions from economic growth?
We did not look at that specifically. Again, what we looked at in our report, we looked at 4 areas. We looked at how they were going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Did they have a plan? Did they have a strategy? We looked at, did they have a plan to adapt? Had they assessed their risks around climate change? We looked at coordination within each government, and we looked at reporting out to Canadians. So we did not look at that in particular. And remember that, again, we were working with auditors generals from across the country. Some are very large offices and do many performance audits. Some audit offices are very small. And so we had to pick questions that would be common across all the audit offices and that everybody could participate in. So that level of detail, unfortunately, we did not do.
Thank you. I have a sector-specific question here. The first one, you were being asked, please talk about your findings on adaptation and mitigation in the agriculture sector across provinces. In particular, are there special protections and supports for families of farmers who are among the most vulnerable to climate change and the burdens associated with a transition to a low-emissions production?
Wow, great question. What I can say is that I know certain provinces did look at agriculture in the sense that their governments had said that they were going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions coming from the agricultural sector, and the one that comes to mind is Manitoba. But the Manitoba Auditor General was not able to find any more detailed information on how that was going to occur. But that is the level of detail that I'm aware of that we did in terms of our audits. Anybody else? Carol?
Just we did include we did look at some activities within that ministry in our audit. But one of the examples we included in our report is something. It's the Farm Adaptation Innovator program. It was a $1.7 million program in British Columbia, and it was looking at farm practices, approaches, technologies around weather risk. So that was an example we include in our report.
I would add, in our adaptation audit, we looked at 19 federal departments and whether they had assessed their climate change risks. And what we found was that Agriculture Canada and Agri-Food Canada was one of the departments that had not looked at their risks.